the OpenBSD guy. Welcome and hello everyone for joining us on this recording of the Unix Crew. I'm not sure which episode this will be because, if I'm being honest, I'm a little bit behind on editing them, but that's besides the point. I am very glad to be talking with you, and it's been a little bit of a journey getting on this call with you, mainly because somebody, that being me, cannot, actually hold up their end of a bargain when they say, "Oh yeah, I'm free that time." I've kind of accidentally skated by you, like at this point, like what, 2 days in a row?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Whoops. Sorry about that. But
No
it's good
worries,
to
it's
have you
all
on,
good.
man. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So I did want to go ahead and ask you a couple things. First being, how has your experience been on YouTube? Like, have you had many people reaching out and like thanking you for making OpenBSD content?
Mhm.
How has your experience been on YouTube?
Not that bad, but also at the same time not that good, I would say. I think like I saw like once in a while I get the comments on my videos that people say, yeah, thank you, this and that, but so far, except you, I think nobody has reached out to me, which is a bit funny, but that's fine. I mean, I'm kind of used to it. It's just like a background story. Previously, also I had another YouTube channel related to the Linux kind of thing
Mm-hmm.
back then, and then like that one didn't took off at all. It's just like I got so much dislike and all those things, like probably because of the
Oh.
way I talk, and like also back then I used a very like a bad equipment. So, but nonetheless, yeah, this one, the second attempt is a bit better, I would say.
Well, that's really good to hear. Since I mean, you like, there's not a there's actually like not a lot, if much, to find on OpenBSD on YouTube. There's really like there's very few creators in the OpenBSD space at all on YouTube, and it's good to see the guys on there doing OpenBSD content because I mean, man, like there's genuinely like only a handful of people doing OpenBSD content like regularly on YouTube. And your channel is definitely good. Like your channel is one of those ones where I will definitely say it's a diamond in the rough because like your channel is not like, if you search for OpenBSD, it's not the first that shows up. But once I found your channel, I was like, oh man, like I I really like I really enjoyed your attitude, like the way that you presented stuff. I like your channel a lot. And there's a few others in the OpenBSD space on YouTube where I'm like, I really like these guys, and it's good that you're actually like staying regular on YouTube. Have you had any problems trying to stay regular on YouTube? Like, have you wanted to quit or taken a break or anything like that from your channel at least at this point in time?
Yes, there have been like a couple of occasions at least. So for example, last year around I think October, things like
Mm-hmm.
that. I like had like a lot of personal problems, so I took a break from YouTube. But then like when the new year started 2022, I also didn't want it to continue at all. Like I didn't upload I think anything for 3 4 months because it for me it's very difficult to actually balance things out because I'm also like working. I'm having a full-time job, like a regular job, and it's related to the IT, also software development. The problem is like once I've gone through the day and I don't want to do anything almost with the technology, and I have
Mm-hmm.
done this one for a very long time, like for like 10 years, right? I've been in the industry, and the thing is like for the last 4 5 years, like not only I do this like a regular job, then also afterwards like I spent a lot of time on, I don't know, related to the coding technology, experimenting with things, and at certain point of time last year I felt like, oh, I burned out. I cannot like do it, like this is getting crazy out of hand. I literally have no time, no other time for myself, or spending time with my friends, family, things like that. And yeah, I considered actually quitting, like at least on the social media. I actually quit all the social media like a couple of years ago, so I have no regret on that. The YouTube is the only actually one that I'm pretty active on it.
I mean, I'm pretty much right there with you on the social media. I've pretty much, even if I have an account, I don't even know how to log in to like Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. Like most of that shit, I don't even know how to log into anymore. And that's assuming that I even have the account. I know for a fact I nuked my Facebook account. Now, maybe me at like 12 years old made another Facebook account. Maybe. I don't know. But as far as I know, my Facebook account has been completely nuked. But then again, it's also Facebook. It depends on how much you trust them to actually delete stuff. But when it comes to like social media and everything, I totally get that. And also on YouTube, like that is something that I don't think a lot of people understand. Like when you have like life stuff going on, I don't think it's insane to at all to prioritize life stuff over doing YouTube. Like that's something that maybe people on YouTube don't want to hear, but that's definitely valid. Like you kind of have to put your life in order before you start like maintaining a whole other hobby that, especially with YouTube, like not a lot of people understand just how time consuming doing a video can definitely be. Like a lot of people just see your video and they're like, oh, he made this in 10 minutes. Like if it's a 10-minute long video, it took him like maybe 20 minutes to make the video. It's like, oh, I wish.
That's very far from reality. At least for me, I mean, I think probably everybody by now knows that I'm not a native speaker. So I happen like to spend like 8 hours, 9 hours to record a video that is just like 5 minutes. It happens. Like I recorded like multiple times. I'm not happy with it. Then like deleted it and like try again. And then like when it comes to the editing, like I spent like a lot of, I used to actually spend a lot of time. Now I don't really have that much of like, let's say time to spend on editing. Like so more of like my recent content actually is just like almost I leave it unedited unless there is like a something that is absolutely necessary. But yeah, the entire process, like for me, entire process of uploading a video, doesn't matter if it's like a 2 minutes or 20 minutes, is taking like, used to at least take 8-9 hours. Now is like on the realm of like 3-4 hours kind of thing, which is it's like very time
much
consuming.
More. Yeah, it's still time consuming, but man, like when you, because I feel like most people who do YouTube, especially when you first start out, but even more so like until you get like really like your workflow down with YouTube, like you spend an absurd amount of time making videos, like an absurd amount of time. I mean, I remember there was one video that I did that I spent like probably 12 hours making, and like looking back on the video, like it's in like, I mean, I don't think it's objectively like a bad video or anything, but to me, even today, I'm like, oh my gosh, man, I cannot believe, like if only some people knew how long that video took to like actually make, like, it's nuts. And speaking of things taking long to make and can be difficult, how has your experience been with editing video and making YouTube content on OpenBSD?
It's positive, except my microphone had some problems, which actually it turns out that the USB port was bad. So for a while I was recording actually on 2 devices. But afterwards it's fine, except Kdenlive. it crashes on me once in a while, and that's just like sometimes I just like take the video and then put it on the, to be honest, on a Linux machine and do the editing there, because like I spend like an hour, let's say, edit things up, but then when it comes to the rendering, sometimes Kdenlive crashes and I have to redo the entire thing. I think it has probably with my system. I am not particularly sure whether it's related to the OpenBSD 100%. I mean, do you have such an experience as well?
Actually, funny enough, yes. On OpenBSD, Kdenlive crashes like a crap ton unless I run it as root. Like essentially, like if I do as Kdenlive and run it as root, it works fine. Like it won't crash at all while I'm editing it. But no matter what, Kdenlive, when I output a video, like when I render out a video, it will tell me, like it'll go through the entire rendering process, complete it, and then tell me that it's crashed. But when I go check the file, it's there. I have a log file like it crashed, but the render was completely successful, like 100% through and through successful. But Kdenlive tells me it crashed. It acts like it crashed because it outputs a log too, but the render is fine. That's been my experience with Kdenlive on OpenBSD through and through. I don't know if that's like something that's going to be fixed, because I mean, at the time of us talking about this, as far as I know, 7.1 is like right around the corner. Like it should be here in like a week at the most. Technically speaking, as far as I know, it might be way sooner than that, but I'm not positive, and I'm also not like super tight knit in the loop of OpenBSD to even know that. But as far as I know, it's going to be really soon, and I'm kind of hoping that that's something that gets fixed in 7.1. I don't expect it to, but hopefully that's something that they address, because I mean, unless you know to check whether or not the video file like actually is completely fine, you would think that the render crashed and that the video file is not good. But if you check it, it's completely fine. It rendered out mucho gracias. Like it's perfectly fine. I don't know why I went Spanish there, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm running a snapshot version now, and still the experience with the Kdenlive more or less the same. So I think it also boils down to how much the maintainer actually put down an effort on like fixing things. I mean, the person who ports it, as well as I think some of the issues are kind of like native to the Kdenlive, like the Kdenlive in general. I mean, I don't want to dab on the hard work that they have done, but it's not the best software out there.
I mean, I think even the most dedicated Kdenlive users can tell you it's not without its flaws. It definitely has flaws. But Kdenlive does in the same vein. Like, it's not a small project. Like, that's one of the things that I find very impressive about Kdenlive being on OpenBSD is it's not a small application to try and port over, like, at all. It's not small. So the fact that it's been ported over and it functions for the most part, it functions. Like I can, like, yes, I have to run it as root for it to not crash like every 2 minutes, but it runs. I can do my transitions, apply like effects and everything. I can at least on my system that's like beefy enough for it, I can do full 1440p like video playback, scrubbing through the timeline, no problem, and it will just output the file like I want it to. So I mean, for the most part it works, which is just incredible.
Yep.
it would be nice that it didn't convince other people that it doesn't work. Because again, if you're not like gung ho on OpenBSD and making sure it works, and like making videos is a critical part of your workflow, then on first glance it seems like Kdenlive is completely broken and doesn't work, but it does. Which I like. The only reason I hope they address these issues is not because like it will definitely improve like my workflow at all. Like, I mean, when the renderer tells me it's crashed, I know the video's finished. Like, that's literally how my workflow on Kdenlive works on OpenBSD. As soon as I get the crash notification, I know the video is actually rendered, which is hilarious, but that's the way that it works. But if you don't know, that that's how it functions, then you'd be like, okay, this doesn't work, and you move on to something else, which I can't blame you. It told you it crashed. Like, if you have a brain, you'd be like, okay, it crashed. Like, that's what it said, but it didn't, which is just, I don't know. Like, I wish they'd update that and fix that, but also I can't gripe at all because I would have no idea on where to start fixing that. I would have no idea where to start dev-wise, like addressing the issue, because I mean, Kdenlive is not a small code base. Like, it's just not.
Not at all.
Exactly. So I just tip my hat to the person who did port it over and be like, thank you for maintaining it. Thank you for, like, keeping it up, like at least functional. Thank you. I don't know. So has there been any other like weird issues that you've had trying to create content from OpenBSD?
No, except I think the most problematic thing is just like a Kdenlive. Besides that, no, everything is working fine. I think maybe one minor thing is that's like with FFmpeg, you cannot record audio and video at the same time. Sometimes like the audio get messed up on my system, so I have to actually record the audio separately with the AUCAT and things like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the only gotcha that he has on the FFmpeg. But yeah, everything else actually is running smoothly without any problem.
Yeah, that is definitely something that I found with FFmpeg. I cannot get it to, like, apparently here lately, somehow using like a complex filter, like I swear to God, like my streaming script for OpenBSD is like black magic. I have no idea why it works the way that it works. Like, I've tried multiple different solutions for that FFmpeg like script, but like some of the things that should work that I've investigated and like studied up on don't work. And while some stuff that I don't understand anything about, but I copy from like random other scripts from FFmpeg and like mash into that script, works. Have no idea. But there's like, I've gotten it to where the streaming, according to everyone who watches my streams, the audio is much more in sync using a filter complex or a complex filter flag and giving it like, I don't know, like a mix or something like that, and mixing together my desktop audio and my microphone audio together, like creates like a pretty in sync audio, which makes no sense because I've tried like so many different other solutions doing like VSync and async to like try and mix match and get the audio and video like perfectly in sync, and it never works at all. But like when it comes to like recording on the desktop, I always just record to a separate, like I just use like the same thing that you're talking about, using AuCat and then FFmpeg separately, and then just mashing them together in post. That's been the most successful way for me to guarantee that audio's lined up recording wise. Because I haven't even tried to like convert my streaming script back over to my recording script and like get that all functioning. nah, I'll just take the two files and mash them together myself. Much simpler than working with like FFmpegs. Like to me, FFmpeg is like it's just black magic. It's some dark mage sits in his room and like whips up like different flags for FFmpeg, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Like to me, again, it's magic. Like one script is this beautiful magic that creates like beautiful life, and it's incredible. And then the other one just destroys your entire life. You can't figure out, it confuses you. You have no idea what's going on. Like that's FFmpeg for me.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Like, I mean, even if you want to like enable the hardware acceleration, probably not on OpenBSD itself, but on Linux, it just like opens up a new door, like more complexity even to FFmpeg. That then you need to find out like what driver to use, what is the graphic card that you want to enable the hardware acceleration, things like that. It's just like getting quickly out of hand.
Yep. Which is also why I find it very interesting that there will be OpenBSD. There will be OBS on OpenBSD. Like it's being worked on. I find that very interesting because I don't know how in the world you're going to get that to work reliably. Like OBS is such a complex piece of software, and like what it does is very, very. Like OBS is not a majorly complex piece of software, but it's nowhere near simple. Like if you called OBS a simple piece of software, like I'm sorry, but you need to get yourself checked into the nearest asylum, because like you clearly lost all your rocks. Like it's not simple, but it's also not the most complex. But there's a lot of stuff that OBS does that like I don't see it being easy to implement in OpenBSD for a variety of reasons. Like one of the ones being like pretty much nowadays in most people who use OBS, like the browser plugin is like a big deal. And I don't know how you'd go about doing the browser plugin on OpenBSD, because I mean most browsers are not going to be, they're more locked down than on Linux, or especially like something like Windows, like 100%. So that's just going to be a more like challenging thing, which it's awesome that somebody's working on it. Like I cannot believe that someone has been like, you know what, I'll do that. Like I'll self-flagellate myself enough to where I'll get OBS to work for all of you guys. Like that's an absolute Chad right there. Thank you, bro. Like,
yeah, that one. And also I think we need to give some credits to whoever ported this Chromium and Firefox. It's just like major pain to port any browser to anywhere. I mean, now even like if you look into the things like VS Code and all those things, like these editors are not available on OpenBSD because like porting related as baggage to it is just like so difficult. I mean, I saw that they ported, I think, Electron, which is a container that's required for VS Code, is already there, but it's like the version is like very old and all those things. The entire JavaScript is a mess anyway.
Yep. You're 100% right. From everything that I could tell, the Electron like port over here, it's not that it's bad or anything. It's just it's out of date, and then also the effort that goes into porting something like Electron is so convoluted that you like, even if you get Electron working over here, that doesn't mean that apps that are meant to use Electron will port over, because you need a specific version of Electron. You need it to work in the exact same way that it did on the other platform, unless you modify the software. So it's like porting over, like just let's say Discord over to OpenBSD. You would, to most laymen, you would go, oh, well, if Electron's already been ported over, why isn't Discord over here? Well, like Electron has been ported, but it's not fully ready to use for your everyday Electron apps. Like those are most likely using a much newer version of Electron. And then also if you even if you did get it like working on the older version of Electron, I mean you're gonna have issues. Like there's a reason why we update shit. Like there's kind of a reason for that. There's a reason why you don't still run Windows XP. I mean, I would hope you don't. Like I'm sure there's going to be one dude who's like in the comments on this who's like, I happily use Windows XP. It's totally fine. Like meanwhile he's being data mined like nobody's business, or there's like a Bitcoin miner installed on his system. But whatever. Like, you know, there's definitely going to be that one dude who's like, yeah, I use Windows XP and I'm proud of it.
Yeah, about the Electron thingy, like I tried a couple of attempts to port like the Node.js, some of the Node.js libraries. Like that's not even related to the Electron. It's just like Node.js stuff, and like they have written in very bad way that actually like porting those are impossible almost, unless you go modify the code heavily, and then you see somewhere in the code actually it makes it like the low level stuff is making syscalls, this and that, and some of those stuff are really not available on OpenBSD. And like about the Electron thing, that's just like totally it's not gonna work. I tried multiple times. I spent like a couple of days. I couldn't get things working, and Node.js version also is very old on OpenBSD. So if somebody is focusing on the JavaScript side, I don't personally recommend them to use OpenBSD if the main task is involved with around JavaScript. But for other things, more or less is working. For example, when it comes to the Python, Java, things like that, they are working fine.
Well, I mean, we even have Godot completely working, which is incredible. Like the fact that we have a game development engine just working like flat out here is nuts. Like I've played around with Godot here on OpenBSD. It works just fine. Like you can not just fully play a game, but you can build it. Like build out a game for OpenBSD, play it just fine. Like that's nuts. Like I expected to have issues with Godot here. I fully expected to have some issues where I like had to do some like weird hoops to like get shit. No, it just fully functions just fine. I'm not sure if it's like the latest version of Godot, which I'm sure it's not, because I mean it's got to be ported over. But at the same time, like it's not like it's an out of date, like a really out of date version of Godot or anything. It's fairly moderately up to date. I didn't check on the website here recently to see like when the last time an update was, but I know it's can't be that old because like I've played around with Godot and it seemed to be pretty much close to the same version that I used on Linux the last time I checked out Godot. So I mean it's just fine for me. That's also something that I plan on doing eventually, is just doing a few like videos, like just or videos or live streams of me like messing around with Godot, just pushing it and seeing what I can do here on OpenBSD with Godot.
That would be cool.
Thank you. I think it would too. Like Godot definitely needs a like a showcase on OpenBSD, because that's just one of the things where like I was just like, damn, that's nice. Like a full game dev like engine. That's nice. But yeah, like for OpenBSD, like it's one of those things where I tell a lot of people like there's a good chance that you have a use case that OpenBSD not necessarily won't fit, but there's a better option for. But there's also a really good chance that if your use case is not like hyper specific, like like all I do is write JavaScript, like you like kind of the things that make sense, like all I use is Electron apps, or like most of my workflow is just out of like you just X Electron app. Like yeah, your use case probably isn't going to align with OpenBSD. But also, if you're not that person, if you're just a general computer user and you like to tinker, like yeah, OpenBSD, you're gonna have fun.
It's the best.
Mm-hmm. Like I spent. I mean, one of the reasons. I mean, we were talking about this before we recorded, but like one of the reasons that I wasn't able to, or not wasn't able, but I missed hopping on a call with you before, was I've been helping my buddy Scott get OpenBSD working just fine and everything, and I mean, he was having issues, but like we were also doing stuff that we really shouldn't be doing. I won't get into it, but we were trying to go about the install like a kind of pre-release way and stuff. But anyway, it wasn't working. But then, you know, we went through the install, did everything in the proper regular way that you're supposed to go about it. And like, I mean, he had some issues, like some, but most of them were pretty easy to address. And then most of the issues that he did have was like, I mean, I've said this before, but like if you're a Linux person, like can be a challenge coming over to OpenBSD just because you kind of get used to things being segmented. Like the idea that you interact with your kernel as much as you do like through the init system is weird. Like that's just weird to like Linux. Like you don't really do that. Like you don't use systemd to like talk to the kernel. Like that's or give command, like, you know, change stuff. You don't typically do that. I mean, I don't know. You can. Maybe you can. I have no idea, but you don't typically. Like it's not the way that you typically go about doing stuff. And then on OpenBSD, that's exactly the way you do it. So it's just there's some learning differences from coming over from Linux because you get on OpenBSD. The kind of tricky part is there's a lot of stuff that's similar to Linux, but it's not the same, and that can like really throw people off, and also like not like they just you don't expect it.
Yep, exactly.
And I think that's kind of like I would like to know like your like take on this, but like would you say that coming over from Linux to OpenBSD is a good thing, like prefer like as to coming over from like let's say Windows? Do you think it's better to be coming over from Linux or from Windows to OpenBSD?
Definitely from Linux. From Windows is I assume that whomever wants to switch from Windows directly to OpenBSD, they are going to leave OpenBSD within couple of hours or couple of days max, because like many things like Windows, everything is provided to you, right? Mm-hmm. Even in the old days, you had to go and download the exe file and all those, but now you have this store that you just go with one click download and you have everything. So on OpenBSD is the exact opposite. You have to do everything by yourself, and that's the beauty of it, in my opinion. And I assume that it takes some sort of like exercises to get into the habit of like doing things by yourself and like being confident enough that you go and mess around with part of the system and not afraid of breaking things. But so my recommendation would be, if you are a Windows user, just like start with Linux first, get comfortable with it, and once you are confident, then you can switch to OpenBSD. Or if you are having a lot of free time and you are feeling adventurous, you can try actually OpenBSD on a VirtualBox, play around with it, see whether you like it or no. Because like out of the box, you cannot compare these two. It's like apple and oranges. Like they look very differently. They function 100% differently.
Oh yeah, like trying to compare Windows to OpenBSD, like I don't even know like where to start with that. Like that comparison is so crazy. Like I don't even know how you would approach that subject. They're not anything the same. Like Windows tries its absolute hardest to make sure that you don't break it. Like it's meant to be used the way that it's supposed to. And OpenBSD, like by comparison, is nothing the same. Like breaking an OpenBSD install is probably going to be like pretty much guaranteed when you first, like, especially if you're really new to like not just BSD in general, but you're really new to like, let's just say like you've been in Linux for like 6 months. Like breaking an OpenBSD install is kind of a given. Like, I mean, by breaking it, I don't mean like you have to do a full reboot, but you know, you've messed something up. Like that's probably going to happen, if not guaranteed to happen, because you're given the opportunity to break it. Like, and there's, I know some people would say, well, you have the opportunity to break Linux too, but especially like with a lot of Linux distributions, they do their damnedest to make sure that you don't break it. Like there's, I know on a lot of like desktop environments and stuff like that, like if you can change certain stuff and break it, and then there's still like a default like fallback for, you know, if you've broken something, it's still going to work, but you know, your changes won't be applied, or like, you know, whatever. And there's not really that in OpenBSD. Like if you change something and you didn't know what you were doing, or you thought you knew what you were doing, like, you know, like whatever the reasoning is, you change something, you can break it. Like you 100% can. And I think that's kind of what makes OpenBSD good, is you learn exactly how, like there's a value in learning how to break something, because that means you now know how to not break it. Like I think there's an inherent value in that.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, Linux maybe 15 years ago, it was more similar to OpenBSD in that regard, that you could somewhat break it easily. But like at least since, let's say, 8 to 10 years ago, like they started building all this stuff around it, which it makes you not really need to go through the much of details and dig into it, especially this systemd stuff. It's just like they made everything so easy because they have a beautiful user APIs, but at the same time, then you don't get the in-depth knowledge of how the system exactly functions. So that's a part that let's say, when it comes to Linux versus OpenBSD, I prefer OpenBSD way, because I think that's the Unix way, that's a proper way of doing things, and they assume already you are a power user.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about it.
Yeah, and I think there's, again, like I don't think OpenBSD is like for the absolute masses of people. Like I don't think OpenBSD is for, I don't think OpenBSD will ever be for everyone, because I mean, obviously it's not meant, not everyone wants a kind of do-it-yourself experience. Like you really are the master of your OS. Like not everybody wants that, and that's fair. Like it's obviously like your computer, you use what you want to use, which I also find funny, because a lot of people that I talk to kind of seem like they expect OpenBSD people to be like, I mean, I'm not going to name names, but we all know that there are some Linux distributions that will tell you, you know, like, hey, if you can't use our distro, or it doesn't work for you, that's fine. But then when you tell them like it doesn't work for me, like, or like, hey, here's a reason why, like it's not really for me, they get all upset. Like I know for a fact almost everybody that will be watching this knows at least one Linux distro that's like that, where it's like, it's okay if you can't use us, but then they get butthurt when you can't use them. And like people talking to, like, especially in private conversations, will talk to me like that. Like they expect me to get upset that like OpenBSD didn't work for them, or that they can't use it, or that it's just, it's just too much, like too much. I don't know, like I wouldn't say work, but it's, it's just too much newness for them. There's too much like of a learning curve, or whatever it is, and me to get upset that they can't use it. I'm like, no, it's fine. Like that's, like, it doesn't hurt me at all that you can't use it. Like, or not that you can't use it or that you won't. Like either way, can't or won't, it's fine. Like we're not trying, like, I don't talk to almost anybody from the OpenBSD space that's just dying for people to like get on board with OpenBSD. Like, no, it's like, hey, like, it's a really niche thing. Like, like at least want to tell you about it. But I mean, if you can't use it, it's fine. I guess it's okay.
Yep.
It's not going to hurt anything. Like, I don't know. Like, that's something. Like, have you gotten that from anybody like talking to you? Like, where they kind of, it seems like they expect you to get upset that they can't use OpenBSD.
No, but I had this sort of like experience that people, they were upset that I was using OpenBSD. So, yeah, exactly. They say, yeah, it's unstable. I don't know, it breaks, things like that. It's slow, this and that. I say, okay, if things are like that you are talking about, don't use it. Like, mind your own business. Why you are telling me that's why I shouldn't use it? And then there is, let's say, Linux is better, whatever. I do whatever I want, you do whatever you want. I don't care.
Yeah. Well, that's something that I definitely get on, because I feel like in the past, OpenBSD has definitely had a lot of like growing room in the performance aspect. Like, I mean, again, it's a security focused OS, which I feel like some people don't really understand. Like, they're so security focused that if it affects performance, it affects performance, homie. Like, that's just, if it means we're more secure, we're more secure. Like, that's the focus. And I feel like for some people, like OpenBSD, especially since 6.9, I have had incredible performance from OpenBSD. It's perfectly fine. Like, it's exactly what I expect my performance to be. Now, granted, that is like, it's not like, I'm not saying like OpenBSD's performance or like hardware, like, you know, support is perfect. Like, I'm using a Molex adapter for my fan that's been like modified to like run it at a certain, like, not full blast, but a pretty high like voltage, so that it like keeps it cool, because my fan headers don't work from my, and now I'm using a Gigabyte board. It has like super IO or some weird thing like that, and it, like, OpenBSD just has some issues with support for it. But like, I'm not saying like OpenBSD doesn't have its issues, but it's not really a problem performance wise. But I feel like there's a lot of people who have tried out in the past and had performance issues and expect telling me that they had like OpenBSD is really slow or that it's really unperformant to make me go, oh wow, I hadn't noticed that. Like let's just say I was having really bad performance issues, and like them telling me that was going to be the thing that I'm like, oh, I hadn't even noticed. Like, if I'm having performance issues, I'll find out. Like, I don't, like, you telling me is not going to be the thing where I'm like, oh, I hadn't noticed I was having crippling performance issues. Like, that's not, like, you telling me that is not going to be how I find out that I have performance issues. Like, and they also kind of expect that to be, I don't know, like my same experience, like me having to fight to get performance back from OpenBSD, which hasn't been at all the case. Now, I mean, we were talking about it earlier. I don't know if this was before we were recording or after, but we did talk about, like, you know, hyper-threading or multi-threading being off by default, which is a security thing. Which I didn't know exactly why it was off by default. I had heard that it was a security thing, but again, just in case this was completely off recording, you were talking about it being like you could exploit that using just like a tab in a browser.
Yep. Well, yeah, so the entire hyper threading architecture is a security loophole, and there has been historically multiple actually exploits written for it. It's not very easy actually to exploit, in the sense that the person who wants to do it has to put a lot of work. But from what I understood, one of the top devs on the Linux kernel, he said, like, even like you are risking, if you are doing actually like opening some, like, let's say, dodgy websites in a tab, so they can actually do that as well. So that's one of the reason that's like on the even if you look on the YouTube, there is a video that a Linux kernel developer, he says like the OpenBSD was right. If you search for it, there is. So it's also about this hyperthreading that when these exploits about the Intel CPUs came out, OpenBSD said, like I think Theo specifically said that we are going to disable the hyperthreading because like many other security concerns is over there. And of course, when you do that, then you have this like a 20 to 30% of the slowness on your performance. But that is not a very bad thing if you respect your security and you value that. But if somebody wants to enable it, they can enable it with a single command permanently. So that's not a problem as well.
Exactly. And I feel like that's something that I hear a lot from people. Like, I hear quite a lot from people that, like, you know, I would use OpenBSD, but they have, like, you have to do so much to the system to make it, like, for them, like, in their opinion, usable. And, like, the ironic part is like to me, I can't really have a conversation about that because I'm like, you're using a security focused OS. Like, most of the things that people like will complain about having to do on OpenBSD, I'm like, you're talking about removing a security feature from a security OS, like focused OS. Like, what? Like, yeah, of course you have to do that. Like, duh. But I mean, I guess the weird part is like a lot of people. Let me know if you would agree with this statement, but I feel like a lot of people come over like trying out OpenBSD from Linux and take the Linux kind of community mindset where like the focus of not just Linux but many, if not most, Linux distros is to focus on the community, and anything that the community needs or wants, we try to make happen for them. And like they think that's going to be the same on OpenBSD, and they're very upset when they get over here and they're like, well, if I can't use ext4, then what the hell's the point? Like, why? Like, you don't even want me here. Like, would you say that you like have seen that or would agree with that, like, at all?
Yes, I have seen that. So is that like if somebody wants to switch, let's say, from Linux to OpenBSD, it's just not going and formatting your hard drive, installing OpenBSD. You need to actually change your mindset quite a bit and understand that on OpenBSD is expected that you need to do quite a lot of things by yourself, and this is the beauty of it. And also, it doesn't have as big of the community as Linux has, and also in Linux side there has been many efforts over the years. Like you can see like tons of the different distributions that they try actually to please the end user, create something to bring the Linux for the desktop users. OpenBSD doesn't have like, let's say, other distributions or things like that. Just like there's 3BSDs, NetBSD, FreeBSD, OpenBSD, these are the major things. So there's not much of things, and also the use cases is on the focus is on the security, is not on making it appeal to the desktop users or expect that there is a forum that you can just like go and like do type everything like basic questions and then people they are willing to answer. There is things like that. And also I don't want to sort of like portray that it's very unfriendly. No, it is not. But you are expected as a user to actually be able to go through the man pages, manuals, which are very comprehensive, to get by and do things by yourself. But on Linux, things are, I think, like, this is my personal thing, my personal take. I think the Linux users have been a bit spoiled in that regard.
I would completely agree with that. Completely agree. And also, like, there's a big thing in the Linux space where, like, RTFM is like a terrible statement to be told, and like I mean, to a certain extent on Linux, I completely agree with that being a horrible statement to tell somebody, because as good as something like the Arch Wiki can be, it can still be misleading, or at the very worst just have like I've seen it on the Arch Wiki where there's just it's not like blatantly incorrect information, but it's just out of date information, just like irrelevant information as well. Like that's something that the Linux documentation is pretty like it's really common in their documentation to have just not necessarily misleading stuff, but just irrelevant information that just doesn't like necessarily need to be there, or that it's completely like out of or like it's out of place, like in the documentation, like the way that the documentation's organized is like you got to bounce between different parts, like it's really poorly set up and written. And that's something where it's really hard to get like Linux people to understand this, but like the last thing that you need to do is go search for a Reddit post or a forum talking about your issue or whatever on OpenBSD. Like whatever you're using, whether it be APM, APMD, RCCTL, SNDIO, SNDIOCTL, like whatever you're trying to interact with, if you open up the man page and read it, like that will solve all of your problems, like all of them. Like me figuring out audio, like the entirety of how audio worked on OpenBSD was 3 man pages, and they were pleasant reads. Like they were like OpenBSD blew me away with that. Like as soon as I came over and I saw that the figuring out audio on OpenBSD was pretty much like entirely 3 pages of man documents, and they were a joy to read through, like an actual joy to read. That's something that you don't really have on Linux. Yeah, you've got documentation, but you don't have documentation this good. Like that's something that I don't know that even a hardcore, like diehard Linux enthusiast would argue about. Like the documentation on OpenBSD is definitely better. Like I don't know that you could argue with that statement at all.
It's unbeatable actually. Mm-hmm. You cannot find a better doc anywhere. Like to me it's very concise, it's straight to the point, it's written simply, and they put the important information that most people they need it. Whereas you have something like a GNU man pages on the other hand, GNU utils, things like that. It's just like freaking 100 pages of things, and at the end of the day it's so convoluted, it's written in a very cryptic way, or is too technical. Even like for a technical person, it's too technical. Like you can imagine like how it is. And then like at the end of the day, you won't get your answer. This is my experience, to be honest. When I compare like OpenBSD with Linux, like you cannot beat the OpenBSD documentation at all. It's just like unbeatable on any front.
Oh yeah. And I find it very funny when people are like, no, like you just don't understand. Like, cause I've had a lot of people tell me that like, it's really hard to find like, explanations for problems that they've had. And I'm like, did you read the man page for what you were using? And they're like, no. I'm like, what? Well, there you go. Like, you were reading off some forum. Like, just read the document. Like, it's one of those things where like I understand, like from being a like person who used to call Arch home, like I understand like the gut reaction you have when someone tells you to go read the man pages, because half the time they're useless, and like you have to really dive deep and like spend a ridiculous amount of time diving through, sifting through the documentation, really carefully reading it to actually come out the other end with a solution. But on OpenBSD, that's not the case. Like there is no reason why you can't just have a cup of coffee and read through an entire like man page and then be ready to rock and roll on OpenBSD. There's really no reason. Like I don't know. Like, would you say that you've had any experience that you could think of off the top of your head trying to use a certain program on OpenBSD where the man pages were just lackluster?
Not really. I think, like, yeah, so far everything that I tried, I could find the man pages for it, and that's the beauty of it. Again, it's very short man pages, and it has the most important information that I'm looking for. And yeah, my experience is pretty positive. I have nothing bad about it.
And also another thing that like kind of confuses a lot of people. I guess we could go into talking about this for a bit, but there is actually a difference between some of the programs that you're used to using on Linux and on OpenBSD. And a lot of the differences comes from simplifying the programs. Like, I can't remember who I was talking with, but I was talking with somebody from my Discord, and I was talking with them about like, the thing about OpenBSD is a lot of the times you'll find like some programs that you're typically used to having a shitload of flags, like just a lot of flags. They'll still have a lot of flags, but less. And they're typically like also, they make more sense. Like OpenBSD has a great way of like editing programs down, like reducing the complexity as much as possible from a program while still having it be fully functional. And then they'll also change some of the flags that to make them like, I think now this isn't a direct example from anything, but a good example would be, you know, in Linux, the flag for updating something is -X for some ungodly reason. And then on OpenBSD, that flag will be changed to -U because, well, update, like, duh. Like that's now again, I'm not pointing to a specific program, but that is kind of what I found with OpenBSD is they will reduce complexity in a program and then also change the kind of defaults to make them more human friendly. Would you agree with that at all?
Yes, so the flags are more intuitive, definitely. And also one thing to note that is that at least when it comes to the core utils, OpenBSD sources are different. On Linux, you are using like GNU utils, like the ls commands, all those things. Mm-hmm. And that is way more complicated than it should be. It has way more flag support than OpenBSD. OpenBSD, it has its own ls and the core utils. And the core utils, like even on the ls, not all the flags that you use on Linux are supported on OpenBSD. Half of it actually is not working. Like for example, things related to the color ls and things. OpenBSD has color ls command itself.
Oh really?
Yes, there's a color ls command actually. I think you that. maybe it's a package that you need to install, but there's a color ls.
I'll have to check this out. I'll have to check that out because I did not know that. But that also doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, I typically use like LSD, like LS Deluxe, and that's a Rust package, and it works obviously just fine. Like, I mean, that's one of the things that I find really funny about OpenBSD that like I've talked with people about is they're like, oh wait, you have Rust? I'm like, yeah, what's surprising about like I've talked with some people who are genuinely surprised that OpenBSD has Rust, and I'm like, why wouldn't it have Rust? Like, what? Like, what's surprise? Like, I don't understand what's surprising about that. But when it comes, okay.
Sorry, they think it's like an ancient operating system. Some people they think, but it's just you have the latest stuff ported there. Like for example, in the 7.1, you are going to have Alacrity. for the first time on OpenBSD, and it's like based on the tests I have done, is running like flawlessly. It's very performant, it's good, and like, but if you talk with somebody who hasn't experienced OpenBSD, they don't really get that. They think, yeah, it's like running the, I don't know, as if that's, you are trying to explain somebody why it's makes sense to run Windows 98 now.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mainly experience that when I'm talking about the file system of OpenBSD. Like, so many people will, like, I'm talking with them about the file system of OpenBSD, like being FFS or FFS2. But so many people will be like, well, like, that's so ancient. Like, because when you talk about the other file systems that are supported on OpenBSD, people seem to get very weird because they're like, well, there's no chance that the operating system is good if it doesn't have ButterFS, ZFS, or like, ext4, which is like obviously like the most popular journaling file system, which also another, like a lot of people do not understand the fact that like OpenBSD doesn't have journaling, but it has an equivalent of journaling. Like that to some people like does not make, like, it's really hard to explain to them. Like on OpenBSD there is no journaling file system. As far as I know, there's not even one that's supported. I don't think NTFS at all is is NTFS a journaling file system? Do you know?
I have no idea. I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Maybe it has some, they sort of retrofit some journaling maybe on the latest versions, but I don't think by default it supports.
Yeah, but NTFS like works just fine. Works just fine using NTFS-3G, just like you would on Linux. There's a port. It works just fine. I've tested it. It actually works great. I haven't tested out writing to an NTFS drive, which I should, because I've heard like that's a little bit iffy as to whether or not it's going to work. But reading from an NTFS drive, no problem. FAT32 is just fine. ext2 and ext3, I can both read and write. I haven't tried writing to ext3 either because
it's not supported.
Yeah, I read that it wasn't supported, but where I read that it was from someone posting online and it was out of date. So I was going to go ahead and try it, but I just haven't gotten around to it, and I also don't really need to. Like it's not like I'm throwing around ext3 drives all the time. Like that's not really a thing for me. And also, I don't know, like, I feel like it's the file system that catches up a lot of people, like a lot.
Yep, it is. But the thing is about the file system is, like, do we really care what sort of file system is as long as it works? Because, like, when I talk with people, of course, BTRFS, things like that, I think it has, like, a snapshot features, which I think personally is something redundant. It shouldn't be actually part of the file system. It should be part of your operating system, which is weird. But anyway, that's just my opinion. But except, let's say, the snapshot feature for an average user, for me, do I really care about anything else? And the answer to me is no. I don't care whether it's a journaling file system or is whatever it is, like, as long as it works, and on OpenBSD it works. So I don't care whether it has journaling feature, this feature, that feature. And I think like this, like, they're fighting over things that they are not gonna even use it. You know what I'm saying? If you are running something like a server, or you want to have some sort of like very high performance or high throughput stuff, yes, you have to then be very careful about the choices. But other than that, I think all the modern file systems, everything is just like working fine. I mean, you don't need to be worried about anything.
And I think that's also some of the, like, one of the things that I find the best about people who make the argument that like OpenBSD has an ancient file system. I'm like, do you know how old FFS2 is? Like, at all know, because it's not that old at all. Like, even in the software space, it's not old. It's not ancient by any stretch of the imagination. FFS 2 is like what now, like 2, maybe 3 years old, maybe. Like, I think it's just 2 years old. Like, as far as I know, it was released like I think it was released in like 2019 or 20. What was it? 2018? No, I think it was 2019. So it's like 3 years old, like somewhere around there. Like, I think it was 2019. I can't remember. Like, mind you, we are talking at 4:30 in the morning. So for me, so hopefully I'm getting that accurate, but I won't guarantee it by any means.
I'm checking out on the Wikipedia to see what's the date. I cannot find anything. Yeah, I don't assume actually is that old.
I mean, I'm sure somebody who's watching this will fact check it at some point. So if I'm like egregiously wrong, please post in the comments. But if I'm not too far off, don't mention it at all. If I'm dead right, mention it and tell me that I'm right, and let everyone else know that I'm right, because that's very rare. But yeah, like I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure it was like 2018, 2019 that it was released, and like, I mean,
and also it's not also like this thing that they just build the thing and then they abandon it. It's just like it's progressing. It's been worked on, like exactly like an extended file system, right? You had exe2, exe3, exe4, so it's the same thing. It's just like they're working on it. They're fixing the stuff all the time. That's something regular on the software.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean also too, like I feel like the file system is one that just, it gets so many people hung up on OpenBSD, and I'm like, it's really not like complex. Like, a lot of people treat FFS as if it should be like more complex than it is. Like, it's really not. Like, I'm trying to think, because I had one person kind of just shoot me a message about, because I posted a kind of like basic guide about like managing drives, like partitions and stuff on OpenBSD. It was kind of just like not a general purpose guide, but it was kind of just a guide. Like, I can't remember. I put it in a context of some use case, but kind of just explaining like how you'd go about just creating partitions, managing them on OpenBSD. And I mean, it's one of those articles that everybody like has on the internet nowadays, like who uses OpenBSD, but I just put it up on my GitLab. And I had somebody message me and they were like, that seems like really like convoluted. And I was like, wait, what? Like, that's convoluted? I had no idea. Like, managing drives and stuff on OpenBSD is really easy. Like, it's not hard at all. It's different. Like, that's for sure. Like, I think like one of the things that like I've always heard from the people that I'm talking with that are trying out OpenBSD is they boot up into OpenBSD, they have a working system, they're like, oh yeah, and then they run LSPLK and they're like, what the hell is going on? There's no LSPLK. What? How do I even use this system? And I'm like, it's just DF, man. Just DF-H. Have a good time. Like, it's the same thing. Like, hardware disk names. Like, it's really not complex. But I guess when you're used to doing it that way, even though it wasn't for me like a more convoluted method of dealing with drives, it's just new. And I feel like that new and like you can't do this the same way is what gets some people. They're like, well, if you're not making it easy for me, then what's the point? And I don't know, like, would you say that there is an argument to be had over OpenBSD becoming more user friendly? Like, I don't know any other way how to phrase that question.
I for me, actually, there's no point in making OpenBSD more user friendly. It is what it is. Take it or leave it. That's basically how I roll about it. And like it's different. It's different from Linux. The commands are different. And if somebody is coming with the same expectation that they want to actually do the same thing that they used to do on Linux, and they come with that mindset on OpenBSD, is going to fail. So I don't see any way that how we can make it better. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good. You're good. Trust me when I say, like, when it comes to like internet calls, if one of us is talking over the other one, it's fine. It's fine. One of us will stop talking because there's always a slight delay. Like I remember when I was talking with for the first time ever, I was talking with oh good Lord, I can't remember his name, which is probably a good thing. He probably doesn't want me naming him by name, but whatever. I was talking with somebody and they would always apologize when, like, you know, I would talk over them or they would talk over me, like in a call. And I'm like, look, like, it's an internet call. There's a delay. Like, there's no need to apologize. Like, this is going to happen a lot. Like, it's just going to happen. But like, I actually completely agree with what you're saying. Like, there's nothing about OpenBSD that I think necessarily needs to change to make it new user friendly, because that's not the focus of it. And I don't know, like I think there's an argument to be had over that, but I feel like the argument is probably meant for like a Linux forum, like talking about OpenBSD, because in all honesty, like there's nothing about OpenBSD that's supposed to be like, and now me saying this is probably going to get some people upsetty spaghetti, like it probably is, but it doesn't matter. It's true. If you use OpenBSD, like the whole point of it is for you, like you to use it. It's a like it. I don't think it's a stretch to call OpenBSD at all a DIY distro. It's meant, or not distro, but DIY operating system. It's meant to be something that you've done. It's yours. Like, you've customized it. It's like you've tuned it for your system. You've tuned it for your use case. And it, like, I feel like this is something like a lot of Linux, like, people, where they come over and they bring the same Linux mindset to OpenBSD. OpenBSD is not like Linux, where it's meant to cater to everyone. It's not. It's made for the developers, and if you can use it, that's a plus. Like, that's great. Like, and if you want to develop for it, also, that's great. Like, it's not something that where the whole goal of it is to make sure that the most amount of people possible can use it. Would you disagree with that at all?
No. So the way I, like, for example, the way I imagine it's a wrong example to provide, but nonetheless, as if I go and approach the people who actually do Linux from scratch, LFS, right? And I ask them, can you make it more user friendly? It doesn't make sense, you know?
Yes.
So I'm not saying OpenBSD is complicated to use, but like, it has its own way, and also it has its own merits. As well, also Linux has its own merits. So it's totally up to you how you want, whether you want to use it or you don't want to use it. It's totally up to the end user. But again, it has a specific use cases, and I totally understand it's not everybody's cup of tea. But so on the Linux, the beauty of Linux is that it has like tons of distributions with different styles, some focused on the power user, some focused on the making everything like eye candy stuff. Like on the BSD world, you don't have these kind of things. At least you don't see a fork of OpenBSD that is trying to make the more user friendly. You see the fork of FreeBSD that it has that sort of stuff, but you don't see for OpenBSD really. It is just like very unique in its own way, and that's something that I really like about it.
I am right there with you. I genuinely really enjoy OpenBSD for that aspect. It's not trying, like, I think there's a very very good use case and purpose for having an operating system that is made for the community. And then there's also just as much merit and just as much of a use case for an operating system that's not made for the community. It's made with goals in mind that the developers want to stick to and want to like that be their focus. And then if the community can use it and can benefit from it, that's awesome. Like I think there's just as much of a merit for that, because that's kind of what the whole ideal of free software is. Like, you have the choice to make software for whatever purpose you want, and that's kind of what the beauty of OpenBSD is it's made for a different use case than Linux. It's made with an entire set of an entire different set of ideals than Linux is made with, and that kind of diversity is important, because there's just as many reasons. Like, most of the people, like, can't remember who I was talking with, but like there's plenty of people that use OpenBSD that also use Linux and other applications. Like, I know plenty of people who use Linux that will like. I can't remember who sent it to me, but this is a very true statement. Like, very true statement. Linux is for people who hate Windows, and then BSD is for people who like Unix, and that's pretty true, because I know plenty of people who use Linux that like are offended when they hear people use Windows, or that like, I've had people get upset at me because I use Windows for gaming. Like when I want to play a game that just doesn't work on Linux or anywhere else other than Windows, if I want to play the game, I'll just run Windows. And like, it seems like the not just OpenBSD community, but the BSD community at large seems to be the community that's like fine with that. Like, well, yeah, like use what you need to do the job. And then Linux, again, I'm painting broad strokes here, but so please don't take this, like, you or anybody else watching this, like, don't take this as me saying that like Linux is, everyone in the Linux space is this way, but it seems much more prevalent, much more common in the Linux space for you to be like, no, you shouldn't. Like, there's no acceptable reason to use Windows. Like, none. It's terrible. Like, which, objectively, privacy speaking wise, like, yeah, it's terrible. But then again, if all I want to do is like load up into like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good, like, Dead Side is one, like, it's not supported anywhere else. It's a great survival game. I love it. If I want to pop in there and just shoot some people, grab some loot, and like, I don't know, like have a good time, like, I can't do that in Linux. So the whole idea of just like, no, you can't touch Windows is like, well, I want to do that. Like, and I'm okay with whatever massive core, like, I'm okay with Microsoft knowing that like everything that I did in that game, I'm okay with them knowing that like in chat I type, like, again, when it comes to Windows, I feel like it's pretty common knowledge nowadays, like, there's a keyboard logger on Windows, and if Microsoft tries to tell you there's not, guess what? They're lying. Just flat out, they're lying. There's a keyboard logger in Windows. It's 100% a thing. Like, yes, they've changed it and they've made it to where it's now technically not as much of a egregious keyboard logger as it used to be, but it's still a keyboard logger. Like, duh. So like, I'm okay with him knowing that I told some dude that, like, you know, he had big tits or something like that in chat, like, it, you know, like whatever stupid message I sent in like some chat in the game, like, I'm okay with him knowing that. I'm okay with him knowing how many hours I spent playing the game. Like, I'm okay with him spying on that for that purpose. I don't want to use it for my day in and day out tasks. Like, I'm not okay with that. But it seems like in the Linux space, it's much more prevalent for people to be like, no, like, you can't use Windows. Like, you can't use those proprietary stuff for anything. Like, there's no acceptable use for them. Would you say that in the BSD space, like, the idea that using something else for a certain task, like, that fits it better is just like it's just more accepted?
Well, I think nobody cares actually on the BSD side. On Linux, I think the main idea is to sort of like pursue people to switch from Windows to Linux. And also I understand why people get offended, because this is, I think it has some historical things to do with it, because the entire idea of Linux and like a free software, right, is not just only like, okay, it's a bit also, it has a political things actually combined with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So from a Linux user perspective, like I can understand that, yeah, they see the Windows is a proprietary, I don't know, like stealing money from people, things like that, it has that aspect of it. Whereas on BSD, actually, even if you see the code base is not GPL, it's just, I think it's BSD code, right? The license. So that's the difference. It's like it's more, let's say, I would say more relaxed version of it, right? And
yeah,
like, but of course, when it comes to OpenBSD itself, there are certain things that they don't want to add, like a proprietary drivers, things like that, which I fully support it. Whereas on Linux, I mean, they are saying that Windows is bad, but then you have a bunch of proprietary blobs actually injected to your kernel.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
that there's this like a kind of like a, it's very complex issue if you want to dive into it. But yeah, generally speaking, yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I agree actually with that. I've seen such a pattern.
No. Actually, to go ahead and dive into it, because it's funny because I had someone reach out to me and talk to me about the fact that like I was talking with because I talked with Derek or DistroTube, and like me and DT have talked for quite a while. Like DT knows, like I would assume he knows very well like my opinions on the GPL. Like I'm not the biggest like gung ho dude about the GPL. Like I'm just not. I don't hate the GPL. Like the GPL as a license. Like I mean, obviously I don't hate it. Like I don't. To me, like hating a license, like a legal license, seems stupid. Like that just. I mean, unless it's like an egregious EULA that's like sign over your firstborn child and like, like give me a DNA sample like once every month. Like, like obviously that I'd be like, no, I'll pass. But like hating a license just doesn't suit me. I don't really care that much. But I'm not like I'm not the biggest fan of the GPL. Like, which again, I've had arguments back and forth with people about this, like not really arguments, but like just debates over like whether or not like my opinion needs to change and I should champion the GPL. But I'm not the biggest fan of the GPL. I just don't think it's the best. What's your opinion on the GPL?
Actually, I'm a bit on the other side. I think GPL is a very good license. And I wish actually OpenBSD was GPL without, of course, those baggages related to the political stuff. But the reason I'm saying is a very good license because it sort of enforces whomever actually is using that code to give something back to the community. That's why I really support it. And they cannot, for example, if there is a software or piece of code is actually GPL licensed, and I fork it and I modify the changes, I can sell that software, right? But I'm obligated to release the code, the modifications that I have done, right? And this is basically giving something back to the community. Whereas you have something like Apache or MIT, or I think it's also BSD as well. Mm-hmm. If you can take it and then you can add the stuff and keep the changes to yourself, right? This is actually how, like, let's say Apple is using the bunch of like a free BSD enhancement, right? They are using this stuff and adding things on top of it, but they never release actually the changes that they are made. So they just like take the advantage like a one direction, right? They are literally abusing the system or the community. People, they put the numerous hours there, often is unpaid, right? And they take this stuff and then they package it under under their like glorious looking UI, and then they sell it to the people, right? Of course. But whereas if you have GPL and then you modify things, you need to actually give it back. You need to publish the source code. Even like the biggest companies, they have to do it. So if you see, for example, Android is using Linux kernel, right? They publish the source code, or if you have Amazon Kindle or things like that, they publish the source codes that for the libraries that are GPL, and that's why they don't want to use it. Big corporation, they don't want to use GPL licenses because they don't want to actually sort of like publish the changes that they have made, because they lose the competitive edge in that front.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why. Now, again, I like the fact that we again, we don't really disagree. Like, I still think that GPL is a good license, but again, I don't champion it. I'm not the biggest person for it, but I like that to an extent. We somewhat disagree because, I mean, like, in the way that I look at it is, to me, I would much rather have a license where it's optional to give back to the, because there's nothing about the BSD or Apache or MIT license that says you can't publish the source code, you can't give back to the community, but you have the option to not to. And as a massive corporation where you're literally ran by people who only care about what the bottom line next quarter looks like, I like, personally, the way that I think about it is I would much rather that proprietary closed source code that whatever big corporation's using be pulled from, well, open source code, and then not necessarily improved on, but, modified for their specific use case. To me, like it kind of, I think the other licenses kind of foster an environment where not only do the open source, or not open source, but the communities that have these licenses and are developing code in an open source environment, they have the opportunity to continue doing what they're doing and thrive. But then also the companies that are required to make a lot of money can also benefit from that work and not have to essentially spend more resources and time trying to essentially rework the wheel. There's a lot of great stuff that is licensed under the Apache and MIT license that are used as kind of a foundational block for a lot of other proprietary software. That's really common, and I think that serves kind of it's a valuable function to have the companies be able to benefit from what the community's worked on, and that means the people who pay for the end product end up not only saving money because the bottom line that they have to paint their margins on top of is smaller, but there's also the fact that because they didn't have to pay and do so much work, they got a great foundation for free. The people end up paying for it. You end up either not having to pay as much, or at the very least, that the software is built on a great foundation. And to me, I think that's kind of not necessarily a more important thing, but it's important nonetheless. And to me, I find it a little bit more valuable that proprietary companies are able to benefit from that. And I don't know that, to be honest, if the GPL was to be the only thing, if the MIT Apache BSD license didn't exist and it was just the GPL, I think overall proprietary software would be not necessarily worse off than FOSS or whatever software, however you want to describe it, but I don't think it would be better off. I just think the applications that a lot of people paid for would be by nature worse, and I don't think that's a good world that we want to live in. I don't know if you've ever had the absolute joy that is using Adobe Premiere, like as a video editor, but it is the most crashy thing. Like it is, if you think Kdenlive crashes a lot, use Adobe Premiere. I swear to God, it is terrible. It is terrible. And the funny thing to me is like, they could just use the base of Kdenlive. Like they could, and it'd probably be better. Like, no kidding, Premiere is so buggy, so crashy. It is terrible. It amazes me that companies spend like $80,000 a year to be able to use Adobe Premiere for like all their editors. That is nuts. Like, it's so craptastic software that it's just impressive. Like, hats off to you, Adobe. I don't know how in the world you can make dipshits pay that much for a piece of shit software or video editor. Like, it's terrible. But, I mean, like, that's kind of one of those things where I genuinely think that MIT, Apache, BSD licenses come really in handy for. Not necessarily that it benefits a community at all, but the people who are spending money on an end product are more likely to get a better end product, just because they don't have to go back and re-engineer the wheel to get their solid foundation to then build their software on top of. But that's like my opinion on it, which again, my opinion is worth like maybe 2 cents, maybe.
I get what you mean actually. So yeah, maybe for the end user who is going to pay, yeah, it will be better. They will have a more pleasant experience. But still, I think this doesn't stop. Like, I don't think it contributes to the fact that makes the end product cheaper, because that's really related to the how much the company wants to charge or how greedy they are, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that aspect of it. But I get it that yeah, end user may have a more pleasant experience. But also, like when initially this free software open source movement has started, the companies, they were very skeptical about it, and they were reinventing the wheels, right? But then they hit the point at certain point of time that they saw that if we can reduce the development costs by actually taking stuff from open source, because it's just literally free labor, right? Then it's better. So that's why they did it. So the reasoning behind it is also still is for profit. They want to actually spend as little money as possible, yet at the same time get the maximum profit for their corporations or whatever. So that's also another aspect. However, if let's say a company, let's say like Google, Microsoft, whatever, it is sponsoring projects like open source projects, I have absolutely no problem with it. I say that's a good thing. Actually, they are doing it the correct way, because they are supporting the people who are building stuff and giving it for free. But oftentimes what happens is they are using the software, they are using the products, the source code, the stuff, and they are not paying anything, but their system is heavily reliant on it.
Yeah.
And this is something that, let's say I'm as an individual, I can accept it, or if the company is a small size, medium size, I can totally see it. But if a giant corporation, they are going, let's say, take things like, for example, latest problem, it was Log4j, right? They are relying on the Log4j, and yet they don't pay a penny to the developer. Then that's, to me, doesn't click very correctly, very right. So in that aspect. But also at the same time, if a company takes the GPL code and they don't say anything about it, of course on the paper is illegal, stuff like that, but if they keep it quiet, they still can actually circumvent all those stuff that GPL tries to prevent. So it's not also 100% bulletproof, the GPL side as well.
Oh yeah, well, and then there's also the scary thing of being like Copilot, which Copilot's been trained off GPL code like 100%. There's been plenty of instances of like people proving that a lot of what Copilot's been trained off of is GPL licensed code, and like the GPL licensed code, like the weird part about Copilot is like So like, let's say you're working at a major company and you use Copilot and some GPL code is put in there. Does the project need to be GPL licensed now? Like, technically speaking, it should, but also at the same time, like, you didn't directly copy any GPL code. It was just AI written, but it was just trained off of so much GPL code that it spit out 99.9% GPL code. So, like, there's, like, to me, I think the whole thing of, like, licensing with code is going to get more complex in the near future, which I think is a good thing. Like, to be honest, like, the evolution of of software licenses, I think, is something that's probably going to like, not just change, but also be very interesting as people who care about licenses. Like, it's probably going to be very interesting in the near future how licenses change and adapt to AI and stuff like that. I think that's going to be a very interesting future, and I wonder how much, like, because there's a whole bunch of interesting aspects to this. Like, since BSD licensed code is available, like, you can just, like, hell, for all we know, like, Copilot could have been trained on some of OpenBSD's code. Like, is that, like, how is that licensed? I think a lot of that's going to be interesting in the future, and to see how, like, companies and big corporations and overall, like, just the community kind of reacts and deals with these kind of new issues with licensing. I think it's going to be really interesting. I'm kind of excited to see how this all shakes out, how we're going to figure out how licensing works with just these new technologies.
Yep. I'm very curious that how Free Software Foundation is going to actually enhance the GPL projects. So let's see whether we are going to have a new version of it that also has additional clause that it says, I don't know, they don't allow the AI programs to be to use GPL code. I don't know, but I think if they do that, it's kind of like they're doing a disservice for themselves, because they need more people and more corporations that are going to be afraid of GPL.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah.
But I'm interested.
I'm the same way. If they do end up doing it where, like, they pretty much blackball, like, corporations from using it to train AI, I really wonder how that's going to work out. I mean, it will definitely be interesting to see, but yeah. So before we go ahead and go, because I am going to definitely need to end this recording and go to sleep here soon. Is there anything else about OpenBSD that you wanted to talk about before we end off?
Yeah, I have maybe a sentence or two to say, is that, like, don't afraid of trying something new. Try it out. Try OpenBSD and be patient about it. Do your own research. Start maybe simple and not try to retrofit whatever you have on Linux to the OpenBSD, but give it a try. I think you are going to like it, and it's going to be a fun journey. So that's all I have to say on my side.
I completely agree. Completely. Well, man, it was absolutely great having you for a good conversation, and I really hope everyone who's watching this will go down into the comment section. I will have the OpenBSD guys channel link down there below. If you want me to post anything else in the description for links, just shoot me a message. Let me know if you want me to put down any other links for your content or anything else relevant that people might check that you have. I'll definitely link that down in the description below. So head on down there, check it out. Thanks everybody for watching. This has been the Unix Crew with the OpenBSD guy, and I do want to go ahead and take a second before we go ahead and end here to thank my fantastic patrons over on Patreon, and also if you do want to talk at all, I've got the Discord link down there below, and we also have an IRC chat that you can join. It's hashtag UnixTube on LiberaChat or LibraChat, however you want to say it. So you can find us over there on IRC. But thank you all, everybody, for watching. I would go ahead and say my patrons, but I know for a fact I've got an extra one and I haven't checked, so I'm not going to name off my patrons. What I will do is throw up a screen of my patrons right now. So thanks everybody on this list for supporting me over on Patreon, and I will see all of you guys back in another video / Unix Crew episode. Hopefully before too long we'll have OpenBSD guy on again. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.